Book 101 review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. This is the second time, people, that he is my guest on Book 101 review. And he's the author of the book, The Object of His Affection. No other than Mr. Donald Proffit. Welcome to Book 101 again, Mr. Donald. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. Hey, it's so good to be back, Daniel. I'm Don Proffit. I live here in Trenton, New Jersey, right on the Delaware River. Sometimes when it floods, I live under the Delaware River, but right now it's behaving. The river's behaving. Um, I was brought up in a small New England town in Massachusetts. And, back then with my family, we moved every 2 years or so. And eventually, as an adult, I settled here in New Jersey, which was a state I said I would never live in, and I have been here since the '70s. So it's turned
Yes.
out to be a good place for me. I'm a former music teacher with 14 years teaching little kids in elementary school. And then in my career as an educator, eventually ended up as a high school principal and assistant superintendent for a school district right here. And when I retired, I started consulting with teachers around the world. And when COVID hit, I took some of the writings I was doing while flying on airplanes and wrote a memoir, Hardship
Yes.
Alaska, and now a second book and third book to be published this spring called Scapegoat, a historical fiction novella that takes place in 1558 in Bruges, in Flanders, which is now Belgium. Um,
Yes.
so that's me. And I have to say, um, at this stage in my life, writing is a joy. It gives me purpose and a sense of use. So, you never know. You reinvent yourselves ourselves all the time. And here's where I am, and I really kind of like it right now. And having
Cer-
people like you to interview me and to work with my colleagues is uh, makes it worthwhile. So thank you, Dan.
Certainly, certainly, Mr. Donald. My pleasure. And again, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. So, what is the central theme of the objects of his affection?
So the object of his affection, the title comes from an old song from the '30s called "The Object of My Affection." And it was a song I used to listen to or hear when I'd go to a piano bar in Asbury Park back in the '70s. And it was a song that really got everybody singing in a joyful way together in this little pub. Um, so the book takes place on the Jersey Shore. It talks about a young man who is a music teacher. In a sense, it began as memoir. Um, but as I got into it, worked better as fiction. I had a little more freedom to work with characters and change up the story a bit. So it starts with a young man who's a music teacher, and on weekends he plays piano at a seaside restaurant on the top floor that used to be an attic, which they converted into this lounge. So he's a piano player, and his colleague, his best friend, is a drag queen named Victoria, who sings while he plays. Uh, One night, a high school buddy of Billy Pine is the main character, comes in, and he had been a bully during high school and caused Billy a lot of pain. His name is Pierce Talon, but Pierce is a cook in a local beachside hotel that caters to uh, old families that have been coming there for generations. And Pierce asks Billy to be a line cook, come in and cook breakfasts. But Pierce also has his eyes uh, on Billy as a romantic partner. So in a sense, it's a gay romance. Um, but because Pierce has a very dark side to him, causes all kinds of pain. That also goes back to when Billy was in high school. So a lot of that is those two characters dealing with that conflict that's been going on for years. Then
Mm,
a guest
interesting.
shows up to the hotel who is a music director for a dance company in New York, sees talent in Billy's piano playing and his compositions, and eventually invites him to go to New York to have one of his compositions performed when there's an emergency and another composer backs out. Billy steps in, and his piece, along with the dance, becomes a sensation. Um, so that's the gist of it. And where does Billy, who does Billy pick? Does he pick Pierce as a romantic partner, or Tad, who is the music director, Tad Lambert? Um, but we don't quite know because the end is an almost happily ever after. So it's not strict romance as a formula. It's more of a novel, but has gay romance as a thread that goes through it.
So, Mr. Donald, what role do the objects of affection play in shaping the protagonist's actions?
Well, I think because it's the title of a song, which is performed throughout, I think the title then is that through line, because uh, the object of Billy's affection happens to be the music director in New York who's bringing him in, but the object of Pierce, the antagonist, affection happens to be Billy. So the song title fits those two characters searching for love, right? Sometimes in all the
Yes.
wrong places. So
Love is all around people.
love is
So,
all around.
how does the title of the book suggest about the nature of relationships in the story?
Um, I think I think most of us go through life and we hopefully find love and a partner that we can live our lives with, hopefully long term, because it can get lonely without that. So I think that title has a universal appeal to people who have fallen in love with people and it may not be reciprocated, or and in the same sense, people who you have an affection for who also then love you back. So I don't know if that answers that question, but that's kind of where I see it.
Indeed. Indeed, Mr. Donald. So let's talk about the character development. How
Yes.
does the protagonist's relationship with their objects of affection evolve throughout the book?
All right. So Billy, as a piano player in this lounge, this attic, converted attic lounge, which the owners of the pub, have tried to make look like a Parisian cafe. Um, so it doesn't quite work because it's an attic, and so a lot of glitz and glamour are shoved into this little place. So it's overdone. Um, so the bar itself is a character, and you've got the drag queen Victoria, who also has an object of her affection, which is a prisoner in one of the state prisons. So Victoria, instead of reading to kids during drag book hour at local libraries on a Saturday morning, she's chosen to read to prisoners, and so she's reading some Jane Austen, and there's one prisoner who finds her very attractive, even though he knows that she's a drag queen, and they fall in love. And so we have that whole uh, kind of secondary love story going on. And when he's finally released from prison, he goes in and moves in with her. At the same time, Billy, the main character, is really supportive of Victoria not. So we have that whole thing with the object of her affection. Um, we also see how Billy really tries to reconcile his issues with Pierce, who's been the antagonist for him. There was an incident in high school where Billy, and I know as a writer, it's not the best idea to kill a dog in a book, right? I mean,
True.
even old Yeller uh, doesn't die until the end. But in this book, in the second chapter, Billy's dog, and it's a flashback to when Billy's in high school. Billy's dog perishes while they're out on a river in the winter when the river is iced over, but the dog falls in. Standing above them is Pierce with two of his hockey player friends from high school who are also bullies, and they fail to come to Billy's aid in helping rescue the dog. So Billy loses his dog, and he's heartbroken because at that time in his life, the object of his affection happened to be Pierce, the high school jock who was very attractive and popular, but that dark side of him being a bully kind of interfered with that. So we have that with the title. And then when he meets Tad, the composer, who's from a wealthy family, who's stayed at that hotel every summer for years, he meets him, and of course, Tad's object of his affection happens to be Billy. So we have all these objects of affection going through it. And the song plays through. So you hear the song a few times in scenes, and then after the evening where Billy's composition is performed, premiered in New York, and they're at a wonderful restaurant, a theater restaurant near Broadway, and Billy and Victoria perform the song yet again. This time, Billy's really singing it for Tad. So I think that's how that song weaves through the whole thing.
Amazing, Mr. Donald. So, what are the some key characteristics of the protagonist's personality?
So as I said, it was based on memoirs. So in a sense, it was based on me a little bit. And I have to say, at that time in my career, at 22, 23, and having just come back from Alaska after serving as a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, um, I was very withdrawn. I was very shy. And so spent my time teaching little kids, and then playing piano at night, and then this summer job cooking for Pierce. Um, so Billy's character is a bit naive. He's shy, yet he builds strength as he goes through the story to determine who he really has feelings for, and how he can take he dearly wants his music, right, to be heard by more people. And so here's the opportunity for him to make that happen, and help him, in a sense, come out of his shell. But what we learn is that even in his quiet warrior uh, um, characteristics, you see he's really strong, and that in that quietness and shyness, he still gets his points across. There's a confrontation um, in New York after the premiere because it turns out that Pierce, who worked in the summer hotel, gets a great job at the very restaurant uh, that Billy is at after the premiere of his show, and there's some tension there. Um, but he even then, visiting Pierce at his apartment, tries hard to say, "Look, you didn't stand up for me when I was in high school. I understand how you feel about me, but if you can, work to improve yourself, you will find love too. So I think that's how Billy looks. He looks at the world in a positive way, regardless of what obstacles interfere, come along. He learns how to remove obstacles so that he can perceive the world in a more uh, loving way.
Yes, people, Billy is like Mr. Donald Proffit.
And then he's
So
not, and then he's not. But anyhow,
maybe it's not, but please do read it. So let's talk about the narrative and plot. What events or situation in the story bring the protagonist closer to or farther away from the object?
all
How about
right.
you?
So I had mentioned already that the death of Billy's dog is a main element that is a catalyst for the rest of the story, because it is in that death of his dog which his father got for him after his mother had been killed in a tragic car accident when
Yes.
he was in high school. So the dog becomes that companion. And then when that's taken for him, it's like not only has he lost his mother, but now the replacement, or where his love was focused, is now also gone. Um, so we have that. Once he goes to work at the hotel for Pierce, Pierce sabotages his work by manipulating a shelf over the cook stove where Billy prepares breakfast, the eggs, the pancakes, all of that. And so, in the middle of a service, a breakfast service, the shelf gives way, it crashes down. Billy cuts his hand pretty severely, which also then might jeopardize his career as a pianist musician. But Pierce has done that because he sees that Billy has an interest in the hotel guest, Tad, who is that composer and music director for the dance company. So that's that jealousy thing there. Um, so those are the main points that we get there. We know that Pierce struggles with his identity. He has a very strong father um, who, uh, for Pierce, being gay is not an option. You're not. So Pierce has to struggle with that and stay in the closet while Billy is out and enjoying life. So we have that structure. Um, Billy does connect with Tad. Well, Tad is at the hotel. One night, Tad comes to hear Billy play at the lounge, and then they go for a walk on the beach and share an intimate kiss under the boardwalk in the sand. Very Jersey Shore. In fact, the town beachside is modeled after Point Pleasant Beach. If we can put a plug out for the Jersey Shore. Um, so we have that, but then Tad goes back to New York. It's the end of his vacation. And while there was a promise of a connection, Tad is reluctant to settle or to have a relationship because his career comes first. So we have that. But when Tad realizes that a composer for a new piece that has to be performed backs out at the last minute, Tad remembers that Billy had this great piece of music. He calls him. Billy wants more, but Tad just needs, the composition done. But eventually, um, we see that they do come together, and they realize. Tad realizes, and so does Billy, that there's promise here for them to move forward. So I think those are the catalysts of losing the dog, the job with Pierce, the sabotage at the kitchen, the meeting of Tad, the romantic kiss, but then silence, and then finally the premiere in New York. But the story then comes back to Billy teaching. And so you really see that joy of love that Billy has for his kids as they get ready for their winter concert. So the whole thing takes place in a few months. from summer up to December.
Interesting indeed, Mr. Donald. So, what would be your advice for those people out there who want to write their novel?
Um, as an old man, right? As somebody who never wrote, I mean, I really, as a student in high school, I was a reluctant learner, or someone who was reluctant to go deep. And I have to say, even as a high school principal, for me to get my reports done on time was always a challenge. But I think for me, the catalyst was um, back in 2006. We had a flood here on the Delaware, and it all my photos were in the basement, and I was up in Maine house hunting, thinking that I'd retire in Maine after being a principal. Um, and when I got the call, what was happening here at the house, when we came back, realized all my photos from my whole life were gone. And so what happened is, while I was traveling around the country working with teachers, I tried to reconnect photos that what I remembered, the images of what happened before the picture and what happened after. And I focused on the photos that I had while I was in Alaska as a conscientious objector. So I wrote those on airplanes going from Philadelphia to Portland, Maine, or Philly to San Francisco, or Philly or New York to Brussels. And I began to take those vignettes based on those photos that I remembered, and saw that there was a pattern and they were beginning to tell a story. So for me, it was an accident as I fell into it. Then I realized I knew really little about the craft of writing. I mean, what I had I thought was interesting, but was I telling it? So I took a couple classes, and it was with the Gotham Writers Workshop in Manhattan, which worked really well during COVID. And because I knew it was important for me to learn the craft and not just be a dilettante who dabbles at it, but I really wanted to know it. So I'm still taking classes there. I'm taking one now on humor writing. Um, so that's how it came together. So what I would say to anybody interested is just do it, right? Just do it. Get in
Just do
there,
it.
write, write, write. I write every day, whether I want to or not, whether it's good or not. You can throw it away. Um, and you know, look at your own life and see all the marvelous, wonderful experiences that we all have. Because even something like, for me, being a music teacher, it turned out to be a novel. I mean, something where I would go to school 5 days a week, work with kids all day, year after year. There was something in there that could be uh, gleaned into this. So that's what I would say. Be fearless, do it. There's joy in it. It gives you purpose, as I said before. Um, but know when to reach out to others for help. I find that when I've done writing and feel good with what I have, then I have an editor who really guides me, and is brutally honest, but in a way, the feedback is always specific, it's helpful, but it's delivered with kindness. So you don't, so you're not beat up where you might lose hope. So that's for me is what works. And then trusting um, that editor, along with uh, a few people who are willing to read it ahead of time to give you honest feedback. So all of that works, but just do it.
Just do it, people. Stop procrastinating and write, write, write.
Right.
So, what would be your short term and long term goals in writing, Mr. Donald?
Oh, short term is to get the book I'm writing on now called Scapegoat done.
Oh,
And
yes.
yes, and on long term is to for whatever time I have left is to continue writing. It occupies my time. I think it keeps you mentally sharp. Uh, It keeps you engaged with others, people who are helping you process that book, but also working with other writers. I'm fortunate now in that I'm working with a group of four, including myself, two writers and a great editor on this um, group called Synthetic Prophetic, where we do hybrid publishing. So we've got three writers, a great editor, and so together we get to brainstorm ideas off of each other. So that sense of community for me is important. So I think that all of that keeps moving me forward.
Make you busy, as always, Mr. Donald. So, to wrap up our discussion for today, what is the ultimate message of the object of his affection regarding nature and impact on personal growth?
Wow. So I think we see great personal growth in the book from Billy's naive beginning, um, dealing with the loss of both his mother, but of his dog. We see how he grows from that. We see his relationship with someone who had been a bully, how he can confront that and still work to nurture that relationship to something better. We see that Billy strives to be a composer with music that has value, and we see him accomplish that. We see him search for love, and we see him find it. Though I think, based on people who've read it, some think he found it with one person. Others think he found it with Pierce, the boy. But I think that's the fun of writing. You can leave that up
Yes,
to your reader to determine. And maybe there's a book after. I don't know, but there's a sequel. We'll
yes.
see.
Let's do have sequel or prequel, Mr. Donald.
Yes,
Mr. Donald Proffit, thank you so much for sharing your books to the world, and we
thank
are
you.
encouraged you to do more and more
Thank
and
you.
more. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Sure. So, number one, this is the group I invite you to go look at. It's Synthetic Prophetic,
Perfect.
and it's syntheticprophetic.com. My book is there, my colleagues' books are there. You can also find me at my website, donaldproffit.com. And I've got a blog there and stories and photos and anecdotes. So that's where I am.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Donald Proffit because if you support him, more empowering books to come. So, Mr. Donald, don't forget the longevity that I'm suggesting.
Yes, sir. I've got it.
More to come, people. See you soon.
Thank you, Dan.
You are